Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Please hit subscribe if you haven't done so before. I want to cover a few different topics in this video actually. I want to cover a post-fight review of Alexander Povetkin versus Christian Hamer. A post-fight review for Spike O'Sullivan versus Antoine Douglas. Post-fight review for Conor Benn, who fought at Okolie on last Wednesday. And then I wanted to talk briefly on Tyson Fury and his trainer situation. And I also wanted to talk briefly about Okolie versus Isaac Chamberlain. So we're going to condense 5 fairly meaty topics into one video. It's going to be medium length, and it's probably going to mean we're going to browse over these topics fairly quickly. But time is limited, and I'm afraid I don't have the space to do multiple separate videos on those. So without further ado, let's get it rolling. First things first, let's start with Alexander Povetkin versus Christian Hamer. Disappointing fight. If you haven't watched it yet, I wouldn't particularly recommend you do so. It was pretty dull to watch. It resembled a bit of a sparring contest. Christian Hamer did pretty well to survive 12 rounds against Alexander Povetkin. Povetkin to win the fight by knockout was a substantial odds-on favourite in terms of how this result would end. So credit goes to Christian Hamer, but he showed very little ambition. Really, he came to survive. At no point did he really cause Povetkin any problems, and more frustratingly, it didn't really look like at any point he tried to implement a set of tactics that would cause Povetkin any problems. Despite the fact that Alexander Povetkin won this fight, probably by whitewash. I think one of the judges scored 1 round to Christian Hamer, but the other 2 were giving everything to Alexander Povetkin, which was a fair score. He didn't actually impress me. And look, he's gone in there against Christian Hamer, who is a top 15, top 20 heavyweight, and he's won every single round in completely dominant fashion. So you don't want to be too critical, but at the same time, I've got to be honest and say Povetkin didn't really impress me. I don't view Christian Hamer as a particularly top-class heavyweight. I think his resume looks better on paper than it is in reality. I think he beat a weak fighter in David Price. I think he beat a fighter in Erkan Tepe who didn't resemble the same fighter who was on a big KO streak. And look, Hamer's a guy who's been taken out by the supposedly light-punching Tyson Fury and the supposedly light-punching Marius Wack. Now, he retired against Tyson Fury. He was actually iced by Marius Wack when they fought. So you were kind of thinking, against a guy like Alexander Povetkin, who's such a experienced, high-class heavyweight with that Olympic pedigree and with that huge array of knockouts in his resume, you'd kind of think that Alexander Povetkin would get rid of Christian Hamer in fairly short order. But no, that didn't happen. Hamer it was fairly tight defensively, and I just wanted to see a bit more from Alexander Povetkin. Don't get me wrong, he didn't look bad. He still looked explosive. His punches still looked heavy and snappy. He was very, very dominant. But when you've got a fighter of Povetkin's class and experience, after 6-7 rounds, when you're dominating a fight like that, you kind of want to see them get their opponent out of there. And when he wasn't getting Christian Hamer out of there, you kind of wanted to see him do something different to get the result, And the fact he didn't do that was a bit disappointing for me. I've actually changed my opinion on 2 things. I'm going to come to the second thing later on in this video, but thing number 1 I've changed my opinion on is Alexander Povetkin versus Joshua. I was talking about that in the pre-fight video I did for this matchup. I was also talking about it in the podcast with the guys that we do every Wednesday, and I was saying Alexander Povetkin could potentially be one of the biggest tests out there for Anthony Joshua, which I thought was a relevant topic, seeing as Povetkin may well now turn out to be the mandatory for Anthony Joshua's WBA belt, so it's a fight that isn't inconceivable. Look, having watched this, I believe Povetkin's lost a step. One of 2 things has happened for me. The first thing is that he's just got slightly older and started to lose the top 5% of his game. He's 38 years old. He's never been a big heavyweight. He looks small next to Christian Hamer. I've met Christian Hamer. He is not an overly big guy. I appreciate he weighs a lot, but if you passed him in the street, you wouldn't stop and think that's a massive guy. You'd think that's an average-sized guy who eats a lot. That's the God's honest truth. And Povetkin looks small compared to Christian Hamer. You just wonder if maybe he's in the autumn of his career. He is 38 years old, I guess. It's kind of inevitable that age catches up with all of us. So that's possibility 1. possibility too, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, is Povetkin is a guy who has had performance-enhancing drugs controversies in his career. It's not something I want to touch on too much detail in this video. I understand that boxing fans are very divided on it, and there's a huge amount of controversy surrounding some of his fights. Rightly or wrongly, whether Povetkin was guilty or not, subsequent to coming off that drugs ban, or coming off the drugs controversy, so we say, he has gone the distance against Andrei Rudenko, who, to be fair, is a very durable fighter, and he's now gone the distance against Christian Hamer. You know, when he was at his peak, he was destroying people in a round. You know, remember the one-punch knockout of Carlos Takam. Remember the one-punch knockout of Manuel Char. Remember the one-punch knockout of Mike Perez. You know, and there's more. There's more that I could refer to. You know, there's a list of chilling, devastating knockouts, and you know, he has gone the distance with two decent fighters in his last two fights. But you know, he was taking out lesser fighters and durable fighters, guys like Takam, guys like Perez. You know, real durable types. He was taking them out with chilling one-punch knockouts at the time of the controversy surrounding Alexander Povetkin and performance-enhancing drugs. So potentially it's something to do with AIDS. Potentially it's something to do with a change in his various intakes, legal or otherwise. Or potentially it's something that's a combination of the two. I don't know. But for me, Alexander Povetkin has definitely lost a step. And right now, he's looking more beatable than I've seen him in his career today. You know, I believe the Alexander Povetkin of 2 or 3 years ago could very well be the #1 heavyweight in the division if he was still active. The Alexander Povetkin who fought Christian Hamer last night, I'm not so sure. I really am not so sure. And I think the bigger heavyweights, the likes of the Wilders, the likes of the Joshuas, whilst they're going to be vulnerable to Povetkin's style, Povetkin's experience, and potentially Povetkin's heavy-handedness, I think that they can cause him real problems from distance. And you know, I think that he is not quite the same threat that he was a year or two ago. So that's something that I've changed my opinion on. You know, credit goes to Povetkin for winning every round against a tough opponent, but I was just expecting a little bit more, and I was surprised it went the distance. Let's put it that way. Leave me a comment. Let me know your thoughts. Am I being harsh? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let's move at pace here, guys. I'll browse over this one quite quickly. Spike O'Sullivan knocked out Antoine Douglas last night in a fight on the Billy Joe Saunders versus David Lemieux undercard. And for those that are interested, Billy Joe Saunders, David Lemieux post-fight review already up and live on the channel. Please check that out if you haven't done so already. Spike O'Sullivan, you know, is a good fighter. You know, he's a decent fighter. I've seen him box live once or twice. Heavy-handed guy, relatively durable, relatively solid. This fight between Spike and Antoine Douglas, for me, was a kind of like a mid-tier fight. It's what I'd think of as like a decent British title fight if it was to take place in the UK. Both guys showed heart. Both guys were strong. Both guys were looking to unload bombs. They both came to fight. Fundamentally, they looked very, very limited. Neither of them you were looking at thinking this is someone destined for the top class. Spike caught Douglas with a huge punch in round 7, piled on the presser. Douglas was almost like unconscious on his feet. The ref was right to wave it off. Spike is a big puncher at the sort of domestic level class, let's put it that way. After the fight, he's calling out the big names, calling out the rematch with Billy Joe Saunders. Let me start by saying that it's not a rematch I want to see. I was at the first Saunders-Spike O'Sullivan fight. That was about as one-sided as can be. And with Billy Joe Saunders' recent improvement, I honestly think it would be an open question whether Spike would land a single punch of note in that fight. And I mean that. I don't think Spike has anything like the complexity and capability of an operator like Billy Joe Saunders. Spike has a puncher's chance in any fight. I think guys like Canelo, guys like Golovkin, who he's talking about, are too durable. You know, he has a puncher's chance in any fight, but when he's fought the likes of Saunders and Eubank, his punches looked a bit less ferocious than, you know, when he's fought the lower level guys. But fair play to him. He's gone away. He's been an underdog in this fight. It was supposed to be a win for Antoine Douglas, the North American prospect, and Spike's upset the apple clock. So fair play goes to him. He's a marketable guy. He's an entertaining character. He's got power, and I'm sure he'll turn up in another fight of some note off the back of this result. So credit goes to Spike O'Sullivan. For my money, just someone who's limited by his technique and limited by his skills. I just don't think he has it to go too much higher than the Antoine Douglas level. I think once he does, he will be exposed technically, as has happened prior in his career. Too defensively open, too lacking in fundamentals for my money. But credit goes to him. Good to see him involved. Let's talk briefly about the Conor Benn fight, because I haven't covered that yet, even though it was nearly a week ago. Conor Benn fought Cedric Peno at Okolie. Peno came into the ring, 5 wins, 4 losses, 3 draws. Conor Benn wins on points, 57-54. Benn is down twice in the first round and ended the fight with his face completely marked up. Looked in a lot of trouble throughout the course of the fight. Even the Sky commentary team, I think it was Tony Bellew, scored the fight a draw. The majority perception from Facebook, from Twitter, seems to be that Conor Benn was very lucky to win. They think that Cedric Peno was a worthy winner, and the margin of his victory, with the referee scoring it to Conor Benn by 3 rounds, the consensus seems to be that is a highly controversial scorecard and very, very unreflective of the realities of the situation. Before we talk about the fight, let me start by saying, when you see Conor Benn enter the ring and the announcer announces that he's weighed in at just over the welterweight limit, you know there's a problem. Look, I've been saying this now, I sound like a broken record. I've probably said this in 10 separate videos. Conor Benn is not a welterweight. I'm not sure Conor Benn is a light welterweight. I think Conor Benn is a lightweight. Light welterweight, absolute maximum. He's very, very, very small at welterweight. So for this fight, by a small fraction, admittedly, he hasn't made the welterweight limit. His opponent has weighed in a pound or 2 over the welterweight limit. So Conor Benn and his opponent are technically having a catchweight, light middleweight fight for this matchup. What on earth is Team Benn, Conor Benn, Eddie Hearn doing? Campaigning Conor Benn at light middleweight? Or, if you're saying I'm getting overly detailed by calling it a light middleweight fight, what on earth are they doing calling it as a welterweight? We can all sit here and all see that Conor Benn is not a welterweight. It's blatantly obvious. It is so obvious. He was in against a journeyman welterweight opponent who was so much bigger than him. Why has it happened that they haven't even made this fight at 147? It's bizarre. He was outsized from the get-go. Not that I'm saying size was the determining factor in this fight, but that's the first thing I thought before the fight had even begun when I watched it back. Why on earth has this fight been made at this weight? You could see he was outsized from the beginning. So Benn comes out, gets dropped in the first round. Second and third round is all-out war, really. Second and third round are brutal rounds. Lots of swinging, lots of rawness, lots of desire, lots of heart, lots of guts. But fundamentally, like a bit of a barroom brawl style. Conor Benn, for me, comes on stronger in the second half of the fight. He's the professional boxer. He's the guy who's got the money behind him. I'm presuming he's fitter, trains harder than Cedric Peno. For all I know, Cedric Peno might have a full-time job, etc. I don't know. For me, Conor Benn gets the better of the fight in the second half. He scores 2 10-8 rounds, round 5 and round 6. So, I'm presuming to get to this scorecard with Conor Benn 57 and Peno 54. I've been trying to work this out, and if anyone knows this for a fact, leave me a comment in the section below. I'm presuming the ref has scored 10-7 the first round to Peno, because there were 2 knockdowns there. I'm presuming he scored the second round even, 10-10. I'm presuming he's given 3 and 4, 10-9 to Benn. And I'm presuming he's given 5 and 6, 10-8 to Benn. So let's start by taking out some controversy here. 5 and 6 are easy rounds to score. Benn wins both rounds for me, and they're both 10-8 rounds because there's 2 knockdowns involved. Limited controversy there. The first round's also quite easy to score. Peno scores 2 knockdowns. It's a 10-7 round. Now, I think that is something that's important here, because people look back at this fight and say they both knocked each other down. You know, they both knocked each other down twice. That cancels each other out. Well, not quite, actually. Because even though Peno has knocked down Benn twice, Conor Benn actually has a 1-point advantage for his 2 knockdowns. Because Peno knocked his opponent down twice in the first round, which means he takes a 3-point margin. Conor Benn knocked his opponent down twice over 2 rounds, which essentially means he gets a 4-point margin because it's 2 10-8 rounds, so 2 in each round. So the knockdowns don't quite cancel each other out. That's something I wanted to mention because I've seen that stated, in my opinion, incorrectly elsewhere. So those rounds are easy to score, 1, 5 and 6. So that leaves us with round 2, 3 and 4. Now Bellew gave 2 and 3 to Peno. I think Peno definitely won 2. I think 3 he could well have won. I also think if you were so inclined, you could make a case for Benn to win 3. I think 4, you can probably say that Benn won. So, look, my take is that scoring 10-10 round 2 to Peno is very, very, very generous. And I think if you score that round 10-9 to Cedric Peno, you've got a slightly fairer reflection of where the fight is at. I think either way, Benn has had a lucky escape here. I think he's a lucky boy. And even if he's just about deserving of scraping the win, you know, I could see it being a draw. I could see Benn winning the fight by 1 point. Let's all agree he's very, very flattered by the margin of victory, and he's had a lucky escape there. But lessons need to be learned. You know, Benn's a fighter for me who's blown hot and cold. I've seen some fights where I think he's dramatically improved. I've seen some fights where he's calm and composed and he's boxing well. I've seen other fights where he's like an unskilled fighter, just getting through on heart and determination. I don't think he's necessarily got a bad chin. You know, people calling out the fact he got dropped twice. I thought Bellew's commentary on the first knockdown was spot on. He basically got caught with a solid punch, but was just knocked off balance. You know, he was standing too square. He was too upright when it hit him, and it kind of tipped him over. I thought the second knockdown, which Bellew and Smith were questioning whether it was a knockdown, I thought it was definitely a knockdown. You know, what's the definition of a knockdown? The opponent punched him in the face. He lost balance and went down. You know, Bellew and Smith seemed to be insinuating it was a slip. Well, I'll tell you, if Anthony Joshua punched me in the face, I'd be slipping over pretty quickly as well. You know, it's very easy to slip over when someone smashes you in the mouth. Yeah, I think Peno scored 2 legit knockdowns, but neither time was Benn hurt. I thought both times were due to him being a bit off balance, a bit square. And both times he was tipped over and he got back up. So, you know, there's some credit here that deserves to go to Benn. He showed a lot of heart, and on his worst night, he showed a level of power, a level of resilience, and good fitness. So it's not a complete disaster from Benn. But what this does show to me is that he needs to get well away from welterweight, and that he needs to be kept at the kind of level he's at for another year. He's a young guy. He's obviously got a future ahead of him due to his surname. He's becoming a marketable fighter because whilst this performance was questionable, it was entertaining. You know, it was very entertaining. Let's get that right. Let's keep him at this level for a year. No need to rush him. At the minute, he's operating well below British title standard in terms of his performances, specifically his last fight. Be interesting to see how his career progresses in 2018. He's had a bit of a lucky escape. I mentioned earlier in the video that I've changed my mind slightly on Joshua Povetkin. Well, there's actually another fight I've changed my opinion on, and that's Lawrence Okolie versus Isaac Chamberlain. I've always been of the opinion that I would make Lawrence Okolie a bit of an underdog against Chamberlain, because Chamberlain's a bit skilled, a bit slick, a bit less eager, and a bit less green than Lawrence Okolie. I actually was quite impressed by Okolie's performance at your call against Antonio Sousa. Now look, or Antonio Sousa even. Now look, the opponent had he had nothing. You know, he was easy work for anyone of Okolie or Chamberlain's background. Let's put it that way. But I saw a bit of more maturity in Okolie's work actually. I saw him taking his time. I saw him boxing a little bit more. I saw him using his jab, looking to the body. I just saw a bit more calmness, a bit more experience around Okolie's work, and that's what I like to see. Chamberlain, I've watched a bit more footage of him. I do like Chamberlain. I do like his style. I do like some of the attributes he has. But I just wonder if Okolie is just a much, much more sharper puncher. And I don't necessarily mean hard hitting, but for me, Okolie in this performance showed there's just a bit more snap behind his punches, and he's a big guy at the weight. Now that he's possibly acting a bit less overeager and a bit less green, I think that takes away a lot of the advantages Chamberlain had. You know, when I was talking about this fight 3 or 4 months ago, Okolie's learning on the job, but when I was talking about this fight 3 or 4 months ago, Okolie was piling in, throwing haymakers, swinging and missing wildly, very, very wide punches rather than straight, fast punches. And for a guy like Chamberlain, who's calm in there, who can counterpunch, etc., I thought that was the ideal style for Chamberlain to get the upset. But if Okolie concentrates on straight punches, Chamberlain could be vulnerable to him. And I think Chamberlain is a lot less of an eye-catching puncher than Okolie. And I think Okolie I could see being the bigger man, the harder hitting man, the front foot man, maybe even the guy with the output. And, I've started to question my initial logic. And obviously I need to watch more footage. It looks like it's a fight that could be made, although Eddie Hearn and Okolie are now sort of starting to imply that Chamberlain isn't taking the fight, even though he's being offered the same money as Okolie, which is a surprise because Okolie is like the sort of golden child Olympian. But anyway, that's another fight where my opinion has actually started to shift. And like I'd now potentially pick Povetkin to lose against Joshua, I may even pick Okolie to go and get the job done against Chamberlain. Let me know your thoughts on that. Has your thoughts edited at all on that, or are you still Chamberlain, or have you always been Team Okolie? Finally, let me touch on the Tyson Fury situation. He's doing a bit of work with trainer Benn Davidson. Now, quite a lot of people have brought up the fact that Tyson Fury referred to the fact that he may not partner with Peter Fury for future fights in a recent interview with IFL TV. Now, my take on that is I've always been a believer in the saying of if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And, that's a saying that you can apply to many, many, many different elements of life. But I think it's an element that you can kind of apply to boxing. And Tyson Fury's last performance in the ring was his peak performance throughout his career so far. And let's not forget, Peter Fury actually hasn't always been Fury's trainer. Fury was actually trained by another one of his uncles, Hughie Fury, till relatively late in his career, actually. I believe Hughie Fury, who is now deceased, was actually his trainer for the first Chisora fight, so up to that stage. And just to clarify for people who aren't familiar, there are 2 Hughie Furies, one who was the original trainer and obviously now Hughie Fury, the heavyweight contender, so I'm referring to different individuals. So Peter Fury has probably only been with Tyson Fury for 10 fights, I'm guessing. Tyson kind of referred in his interview to the fact that he didn't want to keep doing the same things, working the same routines, it was a bit stale, etc. But again, I bring up the phrase, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And the same routines, maybe a bit boring, but hell, they were pretty effective, weren't they? Those were the routines who turned him into the guy who did one hell of a job on Vladimir Klitschko. Now, the new trainer, Benn Davidson, I don't know too much about him. I need to do a bit more looking into him. I understand that he's well regarded by several names in boxing. But for a guy like Tyson Fury, who is going to be involved in some of the biggest fights in world boxing in the next year or two, one would presume, my inclination would always be to go with a more proven commodity. It would be to go with someone who's got a history of world title fights, the history of huge occasions, has worked with top class athletes consistently for a number of years and has a track record of results. Now, my understanding is that at the top level, Benn Davidson doesn't yet have that. I'm sure he's very good, but if I was Tyson Fury, if you didn't want to train with Peter Fury, you could do worse than looking at Dominic Ingle. I mean, obviously Fury's got a good link in there with the Billy Joe Saunders connection already. And look, any trainer in the world would be happy to train Tyson Fury. I doubt he'd struggle to pick up a class trainer. Now, in the interview, one thing I do want to say is Tyson was non-committal about the future with Peter Fury. I don't even think it's completely clear that Benn Davidson will be the lead trainer for Tyson Fury and the lead man in his corner when Tyson Fury makes his return. And at no point has Fury ruled out working with Peter again in future. It seems that if there is to be a split, it's very much to be an amicable split. It's just that Tyson wasn't overly committal that he would be with Peter Fury for his next fight. So all in all, I think it's an interesting one. I think Tyson Fury needed to make some changes, but for me the changes that stuck out initially were lifestyle changes and that sort of thing. There's been a lot of problems with his career, but one of the things that hasn't been problematic has been his in-ring performances. Now, I appreciate the guy's been inactive, but for me, Fury's more recent in-ring performances represented the peak of his career. So I'm a little bit concerned about a change in trainer, but I wait with interest to see how it develops. And clearly, Ben Davidson is someone who I'll be eager to hear and see a bit more about. So that's my take. A lot of topics in this video. Hope you've enjoyed the content. If you have, please hit the thumbs up. Please press subscribe. Leave your comments in the section below. And as always, thanks for tuning in.